The spoon slipped from my grasp and clattered against the ceramic plate. A sharp, metallic, dark clang cut through the air. Every single sound in the dining room ceased instantly. My father's breath broke the unnerving silence. "Get out," he stated, his voice almost gentle but laced with steel. "You've brought disgrace upon us." The elegant chandelier hummed softly above us, its light trembling on the surface of the untouched water in my glass. I remained standing, the atmosphere thick with the suffocating weight of perfume and shame. Not a single person looked in my direction, not even her. I slowly walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing eerily against the cold marble floor. Behind me, the delicate glass cracked softly, a thin spiderweb-like line crawling across its polished surface. Years later, that seemingly insignificant crack would lead them directly back to me. When I was just 12 years old, my father, Thomas Bennett, confidently told a reporter that talent had a tendency to skip generations. He offered a practiced smile as he spoke, his arm draped possessively around my younger sister Jenna, who had recently won a school-wide essay contest. I stood awkwardly beside the glaring camera lights, clutching the watercolor ribbon I'd proudly earned that same week. But no one bothered to ask about it. At home, my mother, Valerie, moved through the rooms with the precise grace of a museum curator, meticulously fixing picture frames, straightening the floral arrangements, and constantly reminding us that the Bennett name represented order above all else. She delivered this statement the way some people recited prayers, measured, certain, and completely unquestioned. I learned very early on that love in our house came carefully wrapped in layers of quiet rules. Stay composed, stay useful, stay unseen. Our home in Maple Bridge was an old, sprawling house with towering windows and cold, unforgiving floors that seemed to amplify every single sound. When guests arrived for dinner, I would silently set the table while Jenna effortlessly played the piano in the adjacent room. My father always referred to her as, quote, our prodigy. He, in turn, labeled me as reliable. It initially sounded like praise until I slowly came to the realization that it really meant forgettable. The year I turned 16, I bravely entered a local art contest. I spent countless nights painting in the dimly lit attic, the pungent smells of oil paint and turpentine clinging to my skin and clothes. On the day of the exhibit, I anxiously scanned the crowd, desperately searching for my parents' faces. But they never showed up. That night, when I disappointedly arrived home with the small bronze medal, I found them both dressed impeccably for a fancy gala. "You understand, darling," my mother said, delicately adjusting her pearl earring. "The donors fully expect us to be there." She didn't even bother to ask how I had done. I quietly placed the medal on the kitchen counter. It remained there untouched for months, slowly collecting dust next to a chipped bowl overflowing with lemons. Jenna possessed a natural ability to glow under the spotlight of attention. She never actively sought it out. It just seemed to effortlessly follow her wherever she went. Teachers adored her. My parents orbited closely behind, showering her with praise and encouragement. I, on the other hand, quietly became the person who remembered birthdays, diligently checked the mail, and covered for everyone else's mistakes. When Jenna completely forgot to submit her college essay, I stayed up all night typing it for her. When she won the prestigious scholarship, she turned to me and said, "We did it!" I simply nodded in agreement. That winter, my father asked both of us to create a painting for the gallery foyer. Jenna flawlessly painted lilies, precise, commercial, and exactly what he wanted. I, however, painted sunlight breaking through the vibrant colors of a stained glass window. When I nervously brought it downstairs, he didn't even bother to look up from his piles of paperwork. "Too personal," he stated flatly. Valerie offered a faint, dismissive smile. "It's sweet," she added, using the same tone people reserved for children's drawings. The very next morning, my painting was gone without a trace. Weeks later, I stumbled upon it in the dusty storage room, carelessly stacked behind crates labeled seasonal decor. I didn't cry. I simply watched the dust motes slowly settle over the glass frame. It glittered faintly under the afternoon light, as if it were still desperately trying to be seen. Years before the fateful night they told me to leave, I had already begun to understand the unsettling way absence worked within our family. It never started with dramatic shouting matches. It always began with an unsettling silence. Doors left half closed, names intentionally left out of conversations, eyes carefully sliding past me at the dinner table. That was the exact day I finally understood my assigned place in this family. The envelope arrived on a seemingly ordinary Wednesday, thin and cream-colored, carrying a faint scent of roses and old dust. It was addressed to Miss Sophia Bennett in a familiar handwriting I hadn't seen in 6 long years, my mother Valerie's. I opened it at my messy desk in the Community Art Center, still managing to get paint on my fingers. Inside was an elegant wedding invitation. Jenna, my younger sister, was getting married at the Granville Hall. The printed words looked elegant, deliberate, and undeniably cold. My name had been carefully typed near the bottom of the invitation, then aggressively crossed out in blue ink. A faint indentation from a pen remained, as if someone had briefly hesitated before completely erasing me from the guest list. The classroom behind me hummed with the sounds of children washing their paintbrushes, their carefree laughter sounding distant and unreal. I clutched the card tightly until the sharp edge pressed painfully into my skin. For a fleeting second, I thought I was imagining it, but there it was, my confirmed absence spelled out in bold ink. I walked numbly to the window. Outside, the muted light of late autumn washed over the town square, where the Bennett House of Art, my father Thomas's prestigious gallery, still stood tall like a towering monument to everything I had irrevocably lost. The same perfectly crafted letters, the same spotless glass windows, as if nothing had ever shattered. I vividly remembered his cutting voice the night he threw me out of the house. "Get out, you've disgraced us." Sometimes, even after all these years, it still sounded impossibly near, like he was standing directly behind me, ready to strike again. That evening, as I tucked Noah, my precious 5-year-old son, into bed, he innocently asked, "Mom, do I have grandparents?" His eyes were the same clear, piercing blue as Thomas's. I hesitated for a long moment. "Yes," I said finally, "but they live very, very far away." He simply nodded, satisfied with an answer that didn't actually explain anything at all. Later that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring intently at the invitation again. The elaborate gold foil shimmered mockingly under the harsh light of the lamp, catching the light like it was intentionally taunting me. I could have easily torn it into tiny pieces, burned it to ashes, or simply thrown it away, but I didn't. Instead, I folded it once, perfectly straight, and carefully slid it into the cluttered drawer beside unpaid bills and forgotten school forms. I forced a smile, a small hollow smile. It wasn't forgiveness, it was merely recognition. I had been erased before, but this time, I vowed to make sure it was meticulously recorded. I started waking up before dawn again. The small apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the radiator and the occasional loud crack of the old pipes. The air carried a familiar scent of paint thinner and stale coffee grounds. I found comfort in that smell. It meant that the day hadn't yet touched us, hadn't yet had a chance to inflict its inevitable wounds. While Noah, my sweet son, still slept soundly, I quietly cleared the table and laid out everything that held our fragile life together. Stacks of envelopes, assorted receipts, overdue payments, detailed lesson plans, and a half-empty sketchbook. The paper edges were curled and slightly stained with vibrant colors from years of constant use. I carefully opened to a clean page and wrote 3 simple words across the top. Keep close. Quiet. Every morning after that began in much the same way. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, answered countless art class emails, paid whatever bills I could actually afford that week, then walked Noah to the community center 2 blocks away. He carried his small sketch pad in his worn backpack like it was a secret weapon, ready to be deployed at any moment. Together we'd cross the town square, walking directly past the imposing Bennett House of Art, where my father's name still gleamed proudly in gold across the cold stone facade. I used to instinctively look away. Now, I forced myself to stare directly at it until the traffic light mercifully changed. Back at home, I worked tirelessly. Not loudly, never loudly. I taught online art workshops, meticulously organized art supplies for the children's classes, and began carefully sorting through the old records that still stubbornly tied me to my estranged family. Every single transaction, every payment, every old scholarship receipt I'd painstakingly kept since high school. Tangible proof of how I'd managed to survive without them. At night, I diligently added to a growing file on my laptop labeled Foundations. It wasn't about revenge, it was simply about thorough documentation. Each line of text, a quiet correction to the false narrative they had so carelessly written about me. Hospital invoices from Noah's birth, rental agreements, tax statements, a digital trail of hard-won endurance. When I finally finished, I'd lean back in my chair and listen intently to the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the soft, rhythmic breathing coming from Noah's bedroom. Those simple sounds represented everything. They meant that I had painstakingly rebuilt my entire life from absolute zero, and no one could ever erase it again. Sometimes, in between teaching lessons, I'd casually walk past the local art cafe that had generously offered to display my work. The owner, Patrick Hale, a well-respected local art critic who had once reviewed my high school exhibit without knowing my family connection, smiled warmly as he carefully hung my paintings on the wall. "You capture quiet," he observed thoughtfully. I didn't offer an answer. I simply nodded slightly because he was absolutely right. Quiet had kept me alive, had been my constant companion and my unlikely protector. The weeks leading up to Jenna's wedding slowly passed in small, deliberate motions. I bought Noah a new winter jacket, replaced a rickety old chair, and painted late into the night, fueled by caffeine and determination. One particular piece kept stubbornly returning to me, a revised version of an old work I'd originally called Light Through Window, the very same painting my father had once hidden away in the storage room. I painted it again, this time using stronger colors, warmer light, leaving no shadows unfinished, unexamined. On the day I finally finished the painting, a letter unexpectedly arrived. Not another wedding invitation this time, but a plain envelope addressed in my father's familiar handwriting. Inside was a check and a single simple sentence. "If you're willing, I'd like to see you again." His signature below it trembled ever so slightly. I sat numbly at the kitchen table, tracing the faded ink with my thumb. The money meant absolutely nothing to me. The sentence, however, did. Not because I genuinely believed it, but because it meant he had finally written my name again, had acknowledged my existence after all these years of calculated silence. That night, I didn't tell Noah anything about the letter. I carefully folded it, slid it into my foundations folder, and kept working. I wasn't plotting elaborate revenge schemes. I was simply planning a solid structure, creating a detailed map of my life. If they ever came back into my life, I wanted every single truth readily available. Dates, receipts, hospital records, family photographs. I wanted absolutely no room for denial, no opportunity for them to rewrite history. Saturdays quickly became our cherished ritual. Noah and I painted together at the community center after my morning art class ended. The children adored him. He possessed an uncanny ability to mix colors in ways that always surprised me. "You can see feelings in colors, Mom," he once observed wisely. "Yours are quieter than mine." He was absolutely right, once again. Sometimes, during those peaceful afternoons, I caught fleeting glimpses of my own reflection in the studio window. Hands stained with colorful pigment, hair pulled back in a messy bun, face surprisingly calm. I barely recognized the scared young girl who had been unceremoniously thrown out of her own home. I slowly came to the realization that I didn't actually need their forgiveness to feel whole, to feel complete. I simply needed consistency, a sense of stability and unwavering truth. When Noah was finally asleep, I'd sit quietly by the window, the faint light from the street lamps glinting off the vibrant painting hung above my desk. I thought back to the last time I had stood inside my parents' opulent house, the cold marble floor beneath my feet, the echoing sound of my father's harsh words. The sound didn't represent anger anymore. It was now just data, something to file away and carefully store in my ever-growing archive. My life had become its own meticulously curated archive, a testament to my resilience and unwavering spirit. As Jenna's wedding drew closer, I consciously kept my focus on small, measurable things. Lesson attendance, art supply inventory, savings account balance. I diligently signed forms, updated insurance policies, sent out invoices for private art lessons. Every single click of the computer mouse was an act of quiet power, a subtle declaration of independence. No dramatic confrontation, no fiery speech, just unwavering precision. A few nights before the actual ceremony, I opened my trusty sketchbook and wrote, "If I ever see them again, I'll let silence speak first." Then I turned off the bedside lamp, folded the note carefully into the back of my journal, and finally went to sleep. The morning of Jenna's wedding, delicate frost covered the edges of the window panes. Noah tugged impatiently at his little tie, complaining that it itched uncomfortably. "We're just visiting," I reassured him gently. He nodded in understanding, clutching my hand tightly as we left the apartment. Outside, the crisp air felt sharp, clean, and undeniably honest, I locked the apartment door behind me and slipped the cold key into my pocket, its familiar weight grounding me. I had diligently kept closed and quiet for far too long. Now it was finally time to walk headfirst into the deafening noise. Granville Hall gleamed brightly like a precious glass jewel under the clear November sky. Inside, everything smelled overwhelmingly of lilies and meticulously polished silver. The guests' polite laughter echoed through the vast atrium, sounding distant and strangely artificial as I bravely led Noah, my son, through the grand entrance. His small hand tightened reassuringly around mine. His tie was slightly crooked, as always. His shoes squeaked awkwardly against the marble floor. But he didn't seem to care. He was simply curious, his eyes wide with wonder, drinking in the elaborate chandeliers, the elegant string quartet, the shimmering crowd of people who would never usually give someone like me a second glance. Then, a voice, soft and undeniably nervous. "You came." Jenna, my younger sister, stood nervously near the grand staircase in her pristine white gown, clutching a delicate bouquet that trembled ever so slightly. She looked exactly as I remembered her, delicate, adored, and seemingly untouched by the harsh consequences of life. "I didn't think you would," she added. "I almost didn't," I said truthfully, my voice sounding surprisingly even. She offered a weak smile, half relieved, half afraid. "They're here," she whispered urgently. And they were, standing directly across the crowded room. Thomas and Valerie Bennett, my parents, stood stiffly among their affluent friends, noticeably older and now grayer but still statuesque in their designer clothes. My father's unyielding posture hadn't changed in the slightest. Neither had the way my mother's eyes systematically catalogued every person, every perceived imperfection, until they inevitably landed on me. The music swelled dramatically, and the crowd subtly shifted. For a fleeting second, no one dared to breathe. My father's glass of champagne stopped abruptly halfway to his lips. My mother's hand froze awkwardly on her designer clutch. The air hung heavy, with the familiar scent of perfume, and the undeniable weight of recognition. Then he saw Noah. Their reactions happened almost simultaneously. My mother's carefully constructed smile faltered, her lips parting slightly in stunned surprise. My father's hand shook violently, causing the champagne glass to tremble precariously in his grip, catching the light for one brief moment before it slipped from his fingers and shattered loudly on the floor. Heads immediately turned in our direction. The quartet's delicate melody stumbled awkwardly, then abruptly stopped altogether. What is this?" my mother whispered in disbelief. Noah blinked innocently, startled by the sudden noise, then instinctively hid behind my leg. I could feel his small heartbeat racing against my dress. Every single eye in the hall was now focused intently on us, on the scandal that had unexpectedly returned, wearing a small, ill-fitting suit and possessing those curious, undeniably blue eyes. I didn't move. I didn't speak. A thick silence filled the vast space they had so meticulously built from reputation and fear. For once in their perfectly controlled lives, they couldn't control it. The first person to recover from the shock was Patrick Hale, the perceptive art critic who had consistently supported my work over the years. He stepped forward, looking knowingly from me to Noah, then directly to my father. "The boy's got her hands," he said quietly, almost reverently. "Look at that sketchbook." Noah had already instinctively pulled it out of his backpack, his go-to coping mechanism in any tense situation. He confidently placed it on a nearby table and began to draw with focused intensity. The soft scratching sound of the pencil against the paper broke the oppressive silence like a steady, reassuring heartbeat. Guests leaned closer, drawn in by his unwavering concentration. The drawing was surprisingly simple: two figures standing beneath a bright window, with light falling gently between them. My father's jaw visibly clenched. I watched him slowly realize what everyone else in the room already saw. That particular window, that distinct composition, it was undeniably mine. The very same image I had painstakingly painted years ago, the one he had so carelessly buried in that dusty storage room. "He has her gift," Patrick said softly, his voice filled with admiration. "A Bennett, after all." The crowd murmured in agreement. Somewhere behind us, glasses clinked nervously again. The orchestra hesitated uncertainly, unsure whether to resume playing. My father finally spoke, his voice noticeably lower now. "Sophia," he said, simply speaking my name. It sounded heavy, almost like a confession. He took a hesitant step forward. "Please don't go." I finally turned to face him directly. For the very first time, his eyes weren't made of cold, unyielding stone. "You told me to leave," I reminded him quietly. "I did," he admitted, exhaling deeply, his shoulders visibly dropping as the carefully constructed performance finally faded away. I was wrong. My mother's voice broke through the tension. "He looks so much like you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He should," I replied simply. "You tried desperately to erase me, but he's living proof that you couldn't." Noah looked up at me innocently, completely unaware of the emotional storm he had just inadvertently calmed. "Can we go home now, Mom?" he whispered sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied softly, taking his small hand in mine. The wedding guests silently parted as we walked past. My father's hand lifted slightly, but he didn't actually touch me. My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, caught somewhere between pride and regret. At the doorway, I paused long enough to glance back one last time. The shattered glass still glistened brightly on the polished marble floor. A waiter knelt carefully, sweeping the broken pieces into a silver pan. I didn't feel victorious. I simply felt precise, grounded. Behind me, I faintly heard my father call my name again, softer this time, but I didn't turn around. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a welcome reset. The music started again inside, sounding distant and muffled by the heavy doors. I held Noah's hand tighter as we stepped out into the night. Justice, I realized, didn't always arrive with a deafening roar. Sometimes it came quietly, like a breath the room had been holding for years. Snow began to fall the following week, thin, slow flakes that danced in the streetlights outside our small apartment. The world had grown quiet again. Inside, the old heater rattled comfortingly, and the familiar scent of warm cocoa filled the air. Noah sat contentedly at the table, coloring a picture of two people holding hands under falling snow. He hummed softly to himself, completely unaware that anything in our life had fundamentally changed. Since the wedding, my cell phone had buzzed twice. Both messages were from Jenna, both short and carefully worded. The last one read, "They want to come see your class." I didn't answer right away. I kept staring thoughtfully at the half-finished mural on the studio wall, our students' collective project. A vibrant burst of color boldly spreading across the gray concrete. Every brushstroke was a tangible reminder of what I had bravely built from years of painful silence. That Saturday, they actually came. Thomas and Valerie Bennett, my parents, stood hesitantly in the doorway of the children's art room. No cameras, no audience, just the faint hum of happy laughter and the comforting smell of poster paint. Noah eagerly ran to greet them, tugging them playfully toward his table. "Grandpa, Grandma, look, I'm mixing blue and yellow." His voice was bright and completely innocent. They followed him, looking slightly unsure, as if stepping cautiously into unfamiliar light. My father watched Noah paint, his usually stern eyes softening almost imperceptibly. My mother sat quietly beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap until she finally whispered, "He's happy here." I nodded in agreement. "We both are." For a long while they simply stayed, quietly helping to rinse paintbrushes, carefully drying freshly painted artwork, slowly learning the steady rhythm of my new world. When the art class finally ended, Noah proudly handed my father a small, carefully drawn picture, a window filled with brilliant sunlight, the very same image I had painted so many years ago. My father took it carefully, his voice unusually low. "You kept your light," he observed softly. I didn't offer an answer. I didn't need to. That evening, after they had finally left, the room smelled faintly of soap and drying paint. I stood alone by the window, watching the world outside. Children's laughter echoed from the nearby park, gradually fading into the night wind. The world felt still and peaceful, in a way that didn't actually need their forgiveness to exist.